Rodney, good afternoon, man. How you doing?
I'm doing great, Drew. How are you?
Doing well. Sitting here in the hot seat for Ryan Fowler, and always enjoy being on in Tuscaloosa, my friend.
Yeah, I was just telling Marquise it's Ryan's birthday. He's out on a cruise. And, uh, Marquise informed me he was going on one cruise, would get back and go on another one. So he's living the life right now.
Yeah, he's taking a little bit of a break, man. Decompressing following Alabama football, and of course, recruiting just wrapped up last Wednesday for this class for the University of Alabama. To me, there was only two small disappointments with the signing class, Rodney. Certainly, a player like Dax Hill, of course, we don't know how any of these young men are going to play until they get on campus at their prospective colleges and perform. But he was a guy, you and I have a mutual friend, and I talked to him a lot in recruiting out in the state of Texas, and he covers Oklahoma and Texas. Was so high on Dax Hill. It was very disappointing, though. In hindsight, he was really only committed to Alabama for a few days. Ended up signing early with Michigan. That was a disappointment. And then not to close one of the two with Henry Toa, from De La Salle High School. I think losing Tosh Lupoy had a lot to do with that. And also in the early signing period, N'Kobe Dean from Horn Lake, Mississippi, who ended up signing, with the University of Georgia. To me, that was really the only two small disappointments. I thought this recruiting class, it was built inside out along the defensive line and offensive line, still pretty much hit on every other need. It was just slightly disappointing not to sign the elite safety in Dax Hill and one of those two middle linebacker prospects.
Yep. The good news is they did get Jordan Battle. They got a great
Yes.
class of defensive backs. As good as the class was last year, to come back and follow up another great secondary group is pretty amazing, actually. That Dax Hill thing was probably among the strangest recruitments I've ever kind of seen. Was obviously committed to Michigan, and then decommitted suddenly in December and signed with Michigan. But like you said, a few days later, very strange situation. But again, I think Alabama did really well in the secondary. As I look at it, nitpicking a little bit, the thing that would probably, if I wanted to pick out a disappointment, would probably be Henry Toa, the inside linebacker
right.
from Concord, De La Salle, California. Now, I know Tosh Lupoy's departure probably had something to do with it. Maybe. I still believe that Henry really, for a long time, preferred Alabama. I know that his family helped make his decision for him, but he ended up at Tennessee. That's where he is, and you have to look at the class as a whole. And I think when you do that, Drew, we said all along here, TiderInsider, on TiderInsider.com and on Ryan's show and your show up there in Huntsville, that we really felt like that Alabama would have the number one offensive and defensive line classes in America. And I think when you cut it down, you look at it now on paper, certainly other schools had really good ones. Tennessee had an excellent offensive line class, it appears, if you just go by the star system. But I think Alabama had a great offensive line group. Darian Dalcourt is a vastly underrated player. A lot of people talk about they lost Clay Webb. Well, actually, I think a lot of people thought Darian Dalcourt was as good a prospect, maybe even better than Clay Webb, and a better athlete as well. So I think that Darian Dalcourt's a great inside player. Could be a center, could be a guard. Really like Pierce Glick out of Hewitt-Trussville. Amari Kite. I know Coach Freeman up there at Thompson, said many times, told us the opportunities we talked to him, that he felt like Amari was going to be a 10-year NFL player, once he got developed here at Alabama. He had all those tools to become that. And then Evan Neal was, to me, was the must-get on the offensive line, the offensive tackle. He has, the ability to come in and play immediately, I think. And again, will he? Will remain to be seen, but I think he has that kind of ability. But I think it's hard-pressed to say there was a better offensive line prospect, offensive tackle prospect in the country than Evan Neal. Then you flip to the defensive side, and you've got the number one player overall in the country, according to some, Antonio Alfano out of New Jersey, a tremendous defensive end prospect. I thought that Alfano and DeMarvin Leal out of Texas, who ended up signing with Texas A&M, had been committed to them for a while. Alabama recruited him pretty hard there early on, and I thought those were the two best defensive linemen, just in my opinion, that I saw on tape this year. But you look at all the other ones that Alabama signed that are really, really good too, that are right there. You're talking about Justin Eboigbe, Byron Young. I think both those guys are tremendous prospects. Byron Young reminds me of possibly another Dalvin Tomlinson. And Ishmael Sopsher. When you look at him, and I know this kind of sounds, I just talked about Alfano and DeMarvin Leal, but when Ishmael Sopsher, when he's motivated and he's playing and that motor's running, there's probably not a better defensive lineman in the country. He can be as dominant as he wants to be. So I thought that was, just a huge pickup. And, you got Braylon Ingram. And also I think that I would say DJ Dale out of Clay Chalkville's vastly underrated, I should say. He's already here. He's going through the off season right now. So I think he's an interior player to keep an eye on this spring.
Yeah, no question about it. I think DJ Dale and Braylon Ingraham are both extremely underrated prospects. I think it's significant, too, that Ingraham was coached by Jason Taylor at St. Thomas Aquinas, who, of course, played for Nick Saban at Miami, speaks very highly of Coach Saban. And Taylor is a Hall of Fame player, came from the University of Akron, and ended up becoming a draft pick. Jimmy Johnson developed into one of the best pass rushers of his era in the National Football League. So he got great tutelage, Ingraham, and a guy that had been hurt a little bit and banged up, but I think former assistant Joe Panunzio, now back with the Philadelphia Eagles, felt like he was as good a pass rusher as there was in South Florida. So very excited about him, no doubt about it. And, we talked to John Garcia yesterday, Rodney, and John, what John had to say, though, I asked him about Jordan Battle, and you mentioned him. And Battle, he kind of gets lost in the shuffle a little bit because I mentioned Dax Hill, but Battle flipped from Ohio State on signing day. He feels like, that Battle is the best player in that secondary. It really has outstanding instincts, as far as of the prospects Alabama signed in this group. Feels like, he's a ball hawk and that he can get on the field early. I know Alabama lost Deontay Thompson. Daniel Wright returns from injury and also some off-the-field issues, but he has a lot of talent. But I'm anxious to see how some of these young pieces in the secondary fit in going into this spring, especially since, Rodney, the significant part is I think this breaks Alabama's record. Don't they have around 15 early enrollees? And I think that's the all-time high for Alabama.
It is 15, and I don't know if it's a all-time high. I thought one year they had 16, but I may be wrong on that.
It may be. They may have.
Yeah. But it's a good group, no question about it. And you start talking about that secondary. You mentioned, and we're talking about the guys they just signed in the early end, also this National Signing Day that just passed. Drew, you mentioned Jordan Battle signed early, but, one guy that I really, really like that does not get a lot of publicity, maybe it's because he committed February of his junior year and incredibly stuck with that. And that's Brandon Turnage out of Oxford, Mississippi.
Oh, yeah.
I think this guy's a tremendous prospect in the secondary, whether he's a corner or a safety, whatever spot they find for him where he fits best. I think he's a great athlete. I think he's got great football instincts. But not only is he outstanding in the secondary, I think this is a guy that could contribute at wide receiver in the SEC. He's got that kind of ability. I love Jeffrey Carter, Scooby out of Mansfield, Texas, who was originally committed to Texas A&M and flipped to Alabama late before the early signing period. And he's a tremendous prospect, but very, very athletic cornerback prospect. So I like him. I like Marcus Banks out of Texas, another corner prospect that picked Alabama in the All-American game over Texas A&M and had originally been committed to LSU. And then I like DeMarco Helms quite a bit also out of DeMatha High School up there in Maryland. He is a tremendous prospect. I think Mike Loxley had pretty much secured him early on. But, DeMarco Helms is one of those throwback players, Drew. He's a guy that's good size, 205, maybe a little more, very, very physical player, can do a lot of different things. You know, he's versatile in the secondary. So I just think when you look at it overall, you look at this secondary group that they're bringing in, you know, a lot of great athleticism, and you combine it with what they got last year. Alabama secondaries, and I mean, they're probably as in good a shape in terms of a number of young athletic players as they've been in a long time.
Yeah, they really are, and I think Josh Jobe, when he got on the field in the national championship game, showcased a lot of talent. He'll be hopefully ready for prime time now. I think that's one of the reasons why Savion Smith moved on, because there's so much young talent. We've seen Kyrie McDonald enter the transfer portal. He's another guy that had some potential, but I don't think it'll be felt, because I think Alabama has done a good enough job recruiting that area of the football team. And, of course, you always lament what you don't have. We talked about Henry To'oTo'o. We talked about, losing Nakobe Dean. But Alabama did sign 2 inside linebackers. Shane Lee was committed for a long time. He's more of a Sean Dion Hamilton type, in my opinion, a program guy, someone that's going to be there for 4 to 5 years, undersized middle linebacker, but played in a very productive program from St. Francis, the same high school as Ayabi Anoma and Darian Dalcourt. But I think one guy that's being undervalued in this deal, he flipped later in the process, and he's a guy Nick Saban personally thinks is an NFL player. But I think Christian Harris has a chance to be special, another guy from LSU's backyard in Baton Rouge.
Might be the most athletic linebacker in the 2019 class overall. When you look at him, Drew, a guy that's, 235, 240, played cornerback in high school, played some safety, really never played linebacker, but it looks like something that he can grasp very quickly. I know in those All-American practices and in the All-American game, he really looked comfortable playing the position. So I feel confident that with his athleticism, the way he makes quick adjustments, Christian Harris will be fine as an inside linebacker. And again, he's got good size. This is a guy that returns kickoffs 99 yards for touchdowns in high school. I mean, and
right.
looks like a small running back doing it, at 240 pounds. So extremely athletic. I think it was a big flip when he jumped from Texas A&M to Alabama. And you mentioned it, Drew. Alabama, Dylan Moses is really the only inside backer with much experience that's returning. Obviously you have some young talent that's here. Ali Cajo, Jalen Moody, Markel Benton's still around. There was a lot of promise for him when he came out of high school. So you have a couple other guys, but, really not much experience, which gives these guys opportunities. Talking about Christian Harris and Shane Lee, give them opportunities to maybe contribute early.
Yeah, it really might. And Rodney, speaking of that coaching staff, nothing's been announced yet, but you hear the buzz, I hear it. We strongly believe the pieces have been put in place for Nick Saban's on-field staff. How concerned or should Alabama fans be about Pete Golding if he is, in fact, and we believe going to be the defensive coordinator and inside linebackers coach? I mean, he did a really good job at UT San Antonio, developed a first-rounder along with Bo Davis, former Alabama defensive line coach, and Marcus Davenport that went to the New Orleans Saints. And they went from, ranked in the hundreds defensively to the top 10 nationally. Of course, the SEC is a different animal. But what should we make of Pete Golding going into his second year on the staff at Alabama?
Well, I think that the people who are kind of questioning him, it's just the fear of the unknown, because we really don't know. And I think sometimes when you're coming off a year that maybe it wasn't to your standards, and you elevate a guy, even though he was the co-defensive coordinator, probably called a lot of the plays during the season, you have some concerns. But I think overall the coordination of the defense, under Tosh LaPoy, I never was really sure that Tosh was ready for that position, to be honest with you. I thought that maybe some of it had to do, the elevation to that position had to do with maybe his recruiting. And needing him here at that time. I just think Pete Golding, the experience, the track record that he has is really all we have to go by. And, He was 101 in the country when he took over at UT San Antonio a few years ago, and within 2 years he had them ranked in the top 7 defensively and overall total defense, which was very, very impressive. I mean, when you start looking at that chart, you start looking at the top defenses. Alabama was 1, Ohio State, Georgia, and all the teams that you would kind of expect to have great defenses, and right there in the middle of them was UT San Antonio. And you're thinking, wait a minute, this is a typo or something, but he did a great job, and I know there's a lot of people that thought he was one of the up-and-coming stars in terms of defensive coaches in the country. And there's an opportunity for him, and I think he knows defense, and I think, too, that what's going to help Alabama defensively, to me, more than anything, is that you're now going to have some guys that fit with the system, that know the system that you have there. Sal Sinceri knows the Nick Saban system, and not only does he know the system, I mean, he's a hardcore coach. I mean, this is discipline, and I think this is what this defense really needed. Some of the players on that side of the ball, the discipline that he'll bring. Charles Kelly's the same way, even though he did not coach, under Saban. He's coached under Jeremy Pruitt, 2013 national championship at Florida State under Pruitt, last year under Pruitt at Tennessee. I mean, he knows the system. Again, he's a veteran, so he brings that to the table that I think this defense really lacked last year. Brian Baker is going to be a really good fit on the defensive line, and so I really feel confident and comfortable with those guys that they brought in collectively as a group, along with Golding, that we should see some improvement this year.
And Rodney, I know we're the last couple of minutes with you. The transfer portal has become a big topic of conversation. We saw Yabi Anoma put his name in and then remove it. But Alabama will certainly be on the lookout. In your mind, what positions might Alabama be interested in? They've brought in transfers before, and like Richard Mullaney and Garrick Dieter, that really helped at the wide receiver spot. But if Alabama were to look into bringing in a graduate transfer, what positions might we be on the lookout for?
I think anytime you can find a great player that you feel like can help you, regardless of position, it would certainly be of interest. Now, if you look specifically, I would think, to me, the first thing that jumps out would be a tight end, somebody that could maybe, because all of a sudden now you lost Hell Hinchis, a guy that had been a 4-year player for you, a 3-year starter. You lost Irv Smith, who's a great player. So, yeah, you have some guys coming back that have been around. Forstall will be back. Keeter James is a young player that's suspended probably for the first few games. It has great, off-the-charts talent if he can get it all together. Major Tennyson has been around. But I just think adding a few more guys, maybe another guy. You got Jaleel Billingsley coming in as a true freshman. But if you could add another guy that's got some experience, I think that would be great. So tight end would be one thing that would jump off at me, Drew, if they went that route. And speaking of that, just my little rant is I hope that the NCAA does something and does something very quickly. They take some steps on this transfer rule. They need to set some hard and fast rules here, and they need to get serious about it before they end up ruining college football. This is just my opinion. If a guy signs with a school, he should be that should be his school. And if he wants to transfer, it should be like it always has been. He can sit out a year. It's not going to hurt him to sit out a year. If that's what he wants to do, if he wants to leave early, he needs to sit out a year. Because sometimes these kids, they jump. They really don't know what's in their best interest. And now you're opening up a whole bunch of other can of worms. People are going to be recruiting people off people's rosters and all that stuff. And, so they need to sit out a year. And if there's grad transfers, that's great. I mean, I think that if you graduated and you want to transfer, that's a different story. But that's just kind of my little rant. I'm really worried about the direction there.
Yeah, I am too. I think you don't want to see free agency in college football. The Justin Fields situation really bothered me, and we'll see what happens with Tate Martell. Justin Fields immediately eligible. It's becoming more and more common to see that. And you don't want to have, just out and out outright free agency in college football. We already saw Brew McCoy signed with Southern Cal. And then once Cliff Kingsbury got the head coaching job with the Arizona Cardinals in the NFL, he moves on to Texas. So you don't want that. You want to be able to keep your guys on your roster. But it's going to be interesting to see going forward, how that all works out at the University of Alabama. Well, Rodney, we always appreciate the conversation. We know it's going to be free-flowing. We know you guys will have a lot of conversation going on with the basketball game coming up tonight and, of course, recruiting. I know they've had a couple of junior day events. Some visitors have come in, and I know TiderInsider.com will also have full coverage of spring practice. It'll be here before we know it, but it's always the preeminent place for Tide information.
Yeah, and don't forget tonight, Drew, 6:30 locally.
That's
WVUA,
right.
Direct TV in the Birmingham market goes through out a good part of the state from WVUA. But Tider Insider TV with Gary Harris and myself at 6:30 live, and then 10:30 is the replay there on WVUA.
Yeah, it should be a great show. A lot to talk about around the University of Alabama. A lot going on. Baseball also getting cranked up this weekend. Brad Bohannon, his second full season at the helm of the Crimson Tide baseball program. Softball already off to a 5-0 start as well. Rodney, we always appreciate it, man. Thank you for joining us on the game in Tuscaloosa.
Appreciate it, Drew. Take care.